Hello, my name is Bob Brown, and it's my privilege to host this show, which is based on the reality that Westborough is a great town filled with interesting people. Many of them are long-term residents who have so many memories and stories about life in Westborough in days gone past. And so your local cable station, Westborough TV, has initiated this series of programs which are designed to reflect upon life in earlier days and to possibly make suggestions about how we can improve life in this fine town for the future. Well, it's my pleasure this afternoon to be able to introduce some great Westborough citizens who have helped make this town the great town that it is. Not only are they good citizens, but they're good friends, and I appreciate all they've done for Bobby and me. Connie and Earl Hutt. I'd like to have them introduce their early life in Westborough, where they were raised, and then we'll get into something that is common to both of them, namely Bay State abrasives. So, Connie, would you tell us a little bit about your folks?
Well, one commonality is that both Earl and I were reared in Westborough, and at a time when there were so few people, in the 4,000 or 5,000 or less, somehow you had the feeling you knew everybody and everybody knew you, and so we have that in common. I resided in a house that was about a mile out from town, and Earl resided in a house in town.
Now, where was your house out of town?
Out of town, it was just beyond the country club.
Okay.
Yeah.
In fact, my father built that house along with a cousin and a few helpers. And when he built it there, Mother, who was reared in town, felt that she was going to the ends of the earth, maybe Siberia. And there she was, a mile out from town, and the nearest other houses were farmhouses, and they were few and far between. But being a spunky gal, she did what she needed to do. What else can I tell you? We went to grade school there, and the Harvey School was where the first and second grade were. Eli Whitney contained the third, fourth, fifth, and sixth grades. And then we moved on to that beautiful building on Main Street, which is now the Forbes Municipal Building, and that's where we went to junior high and senior high.
Great, yeah.
And we had that in common.
Yeah, all right,
Yeah.
good. And you were in town, huh?
I was an in-town, downtown boy, born and raised. In fact, I was literally born in Westborough.
Were you?
On a house in Westborough, and then brought up on Ruggles Street, and walked to school, of course. And the schools, and as Connie said, were few, and I believe the total enrollment in the schools probably was something like 400 to 500 people in the entire system. I graduated in a class of 54 people.
Wow.
And Connie and I knew each other a long time, courted while I was in college, courted for 5 years. And of course, we were so old that at that time, if a fellow wanted to marry a young lady, he asked her father. And after courting 5 years, I got up enough courage to ask Mr. Crow if I could marry his daughter, and his reply was, "Mother and I thought you would never get to ask." And so we started.
You lucked out.
We started on that basis, and we've had a wonderful marriage.
Great, good for you.
58 years.
Yeah, well, I repeat again, you've been great friends. It's been a whole joy knowing you.
Well, and we enjoyed welcoming you
That's
and
right,
Barbara
you did.
to
Yes, we
Westborough.
welcomed
You were one
you
of
to
the first few who
Westborough.
did.
I
That's
think
right.
we've
That was a
been
joy.
That's right.
real joy, and to see our families grow up.
That's
and
right.
And actually commingled. Your Allison and I think our Cameron were in the same
That's
grade.
right. That's right. Yeah. Now, would you be kind enough to tell us a little bit about the genesis of Bay State abrasives? Many people in town don't realize that where now Bay State Commons was something other than that in the past, and I think it's a very important part of the Westborough history that needs to be remembered. So, I'm going to ask you to spend a little time talking about how it came about.
Since I have so little information, you have a lot. Could I do that very beginning piece?
Well, please,
All right.
please.
When I was in college, I was going to write a paper for some class. I don't recall what one. And I had interviewed Daddy. And this was probably in the year about 1951-ish. And I interviewed him and asked him about Bay State, the beginnings of Bay State. And so he proceeded to give me little snips and snaps, and I wrote them down as fast as I could. But I remember this piece that came from the beginning of Bay State. Very often I'll say Daddy, and that means Mr. Krell, or Leonard Krell, and then Buck was Aurelio Buckner, because he was another founder. They both were at Norton Company. In fact, there was yet another one, George Bullard was at Norton Company. They knew each other while there. Buck was in research, and Dad was in sales engineering. And it was 1920, and the economy was not so stable, and they were aware that the sales were dropping, and that meant things were not going too well at the company. And one of them asked to take a leave of absence if sales fell off anymore. Well, the time came that they all three left and decided to start their own business. And they knew, and it would be an abrasive business, that's what they knew. And they had to decide where they were going to establish this business. And they needed a railroad, a main railroad that went east and west to Detroit, New York, Michigan, Ohio, Illinois. And they would need to be near raw materials. They thought about Niagara Falls because their electricity was much cheaper than it was anywhere else. But shipping was not as easily accessible for their purposes. Now, one of the men, namely Daddy, wanted to be in New England. All his kinfolk were in New England. But Buck came out of the Midwest, and he thought that would be a very good place. And Mr. Bullard preferred Westborough. So it was 2 to 1. That's where they decided to establish. So they looked around Worcester County for a place, and they found in Westborough, they found a brick building. It was an ex-power plant, had a tall chimney, which would be needed, and it was on the Boston and Albany Railroad siding. So that decided that. And you have some more.
Oh, you want me to?
Let me just add a piece. That
Yeah,
they had
please.
the Historical Society a week or so ago had a fellow, a professor from Worcester,
Oh.
who talked about the immigrants in this area.
Yes.
And he was pointing out that the reason this area became quite popular was because of the transportation system, the trains, all
Exactly.
converging in Worcester and being able to go to east, west, and south out of Worcester.
Right.
So,
And you know, those same immigrants were employees at Bay State. Italians were known for their stonework and masonry work, and of course, abrasives.
sure,
It's that's what that material is. It's a
that's interesting.
ceramic product.
Yeah, great.
Well, I'd like to add some more of the history. And in 1922, Bay State did move to Westborough and start there. Mr. Krell was an engineer, graduated from Worcester Polytech. Mr. Buckner graduated from the University of Illinois, and he was a ceramic engineer. So the two of them really started Bay State, and then later Mr. Hughes, and Earl Hughes, who also came from Norton and was a sales manager there, joined them. The location, as Connie has said, was then set up because the railroad found the abandoned power plant with that chimney, which actually they took the top off of it, double bricked the outside, inside the building, and made it their first kiln.
Now that was a power plant for what at the time?
It serviced the old, I think
Was it
they call
trolley?
it, factory down there that made bedsteads,
Oh, okay.
metal bedsteads, and that was abandoned, so the building became available. And Mr. Krell told me many times the third reason they located there was because of the labor force. They saw friendly people, they saw hard-working people, and the area was growing. So when they started in 1922, they had the 3 founders and 2 employees. They cleaned the old power plant themselves, and they built that first kiln themselves. By 1929, they had 50 employees. The payroll then was a whopping $1,500 a week. And in 1927, they were able to give their employees 1 week vacation, paid.
Wow.
And as far as we know, that may have been the first company in Westborough doing that. By 1937, they were giving Christmas bonuses, $10 per employee, and they established a Christmas party for all the children of those employees. And I can remember in later years working 2 or 3 days, carrying gifts up to the town hall so that Santa could come for all of those children.
Isn't that nice?
And for many, it was perhaps the largest and best gift those children would receive.
Yeah.
Wonderful party, wonderful
And I could
party.
add that I was one of those children. As a grade school kid, I can remember going to town hall. In fact, before then, that party was held at the Keating building, up on an upper floor where there was a large room. And one of the employees, an Ed Farmer, used to do magician acts, and he performed for us kids, and it was just so exciting. But I do remember being there, and then I remember when our own kids were being reared, they held that party at town hall, and that's where our kids went to receive their gift.
That's great.
Well, just to continue with the growth a little bit, by 1965, the company was employing 1,200 people and had a payroll of $12 million. They were the largest company in Westborough for many years and hired people from, I think, every surrounding town. People came as far away as Paxton, I remember, to work at Bay State. And why did they come there? Well, I don't know that the company ever had actually a motto or anything written that would indicate how they would operate. But the way they did operate was that they put people first. They wanted happy people, and they trained them well and paid them well. The second thing they always insisted on was the quality of product. And they maintained the quality, and it was always beat the competition with quality. People first, quality product, then service your customers and you'll grow. And they grew on that way of working.
Could you pause for just a moment, Earl, and tell us what the product was? I know it was grinding wheels, but
Yes.
what
The
industry is it?
product was abrasive wheels. And some people say, now, what is an abrasive wheel? Well, it can be anything from a dental drill to a 4-foot diameter by 6-foot thick piece of ceramic, really. The larger wheels were sold to the steel industry, where they made the raw, formed the raw steel, and all the burrs had to be removed and whatnot, and these huge wheels were set up to clean the steel. And automakers, steel makers, glass makers, and machine tool were the companies that bought most of the product. However, as construction became more sophisticated, we sold a lot of wheels to the construction industry. And they would cut materials, not just wood or metal, but concrete with diamond wheels, and then cut the roadways, asphalt. The wheels got used for many things that people don't think of. And but the auto industry and steel and glass were the major customers.
We could also say that Sears Roebuck was interested in Bay State wheels and bought them for the Happy Homeowner.
Happy Homeowners.
And so their hardware department carried Bay State wheels under another name.
Is it sharpening kitchen utensils?
Kitchen utensils, their own tools, and
or anything
any
that,
home use.
Maybe even somebody who wants to redo his old automobile, or do anything that they had to polish down something and have very fine tolerances. And he would get his wheels at Sears Roebuck.
I think I have 2 or 3 stones in my garage.
Right.
The hand.
Exactly. A lot of people in Westborough had stones and wheels. Many types of wheels were actually first invented at Bay State.
Were they?
The so-called cup wheels, hones, cut-off wheels, and later the diamond wheel was perfected right here in Westborough.
Was it really?
There was a company on the West Coast by the name of Felker that eventually we bought that started doing diamond wheels, and then it was perfected here. And Mr. Buckner and some of our employees hold patterns still today that were developed right here in Westborough for abrasives.
One of those products, again, that was widely used by the happy homeowner was called grit cloth. And grit cloth was a band of like a gauze, a wide gauze, and it was covered with, I suppose, diamond dust of sorts. And it could be used to scrape paint, and then the paint dust would go through the mesh so it didn't clog up the grinding property of the that was there to be used. So that was bought in strips, and I remember even we ourselves as kids would use it to scrape paint on our little boats and, and whatnot.
Yeah, great.
And Uncle Bucky developed that, I can remember.
That was an invention of
his.
Mr. Buckner.
Was it?
Yeah, and it's still sold today, of course.
Is it really?
Yes. Oh,
Yes, in fact, I saw some. I don't think it was the grit cloth, but I saw the same kind of product. I'm sure those patterns had all run out. In Lowe's,
Did you really?
you bought it in maybe 12-inch strips, maybe 2.5, 3 inches wide.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
You might like some for some other work you do around your house.
Standing wood.
Well,
That's right,
it's
sanding
great
anything.
because it doesn't
That's great.
clog.
Yeah.
It allows the
Yeah, it's
material
great.
you're wanting to remove to fall through.
No, great idea.
So it lasted
Lasts a
longer
lot
than a
longer.
sandpaper, and it did a great job. And you could get it in any coarseness or fineness you wanted. And well, I talked about quality for a minute ago, and I want to say that also Bay State was one of the first industrial type company to have incentives, specific incentives for every employee.
Wow.
Not just executives or whatnot. So that every employee could earn to his capacity as long as the quality product was produced. And we called that the Quality Incentive Project. Harvard University learned of this being done in a little town of Westborough and sent people out to study what we were doing. And soon that process became used, printed in and used in their textbooks at the Harvard Graduate School of Business.
School, yeah.
You know, and there are many executives who were trained that system coming out of this little town.
We talked about the kilns. A kiln is like the one that perhaps sculptors are aware of, or anyone who works in ceramics is aware of, that after something is made out of the pliable material, it needs to be cooked, baked, fired in a kiln for a length of time. I remember Dad, in talking with me, said that the first one they referred to as the peanut kiln. That was in 1923. And then because the company showed some signs of growth, they decided to build the next one. So in 24, they built what he called the intermediate size kiln. And then later, in 26, for some of the more popular wheels that they would like to make, a beehive kiln was made, and that shape looked very much like a beehive.
You can see the tops of those kilns in some of the
Oh, yes.
pictures you'll
Yes, I'm going
maybe
to
catch up with later or
I'm
wherever.
going to use this
Coming
picture
through the roof
first.
of the building.
Bob, this picture was taken.
Wow, isn't that
I have
something?
no idea what the age of it is, but you can see that this was the original
Chimney.
chimney
Yeah.
that was needed for the first
For the
kiln.
kiln, yeah.
And then later, these different kilns were built, and
Yeah.
there's such a distinctive shape and,
yeah.
and composition. You can pick them right out. So that's what the shop looked like. And if you ask, what's the green grass? No, it was not a play yard. It was the town's baseball field, and was also their football field.
Right.
So this is a.
That's great.
That also was purchased from the town by Bay State to become a parking lot and then more buildings.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right.
Good, thank you, Connie. That's a beautiful picture.
Talking about the product itself, the larger customers, like the automobile people, would want a specific use for a wheel, very specific. So we would send engineers, product engineers, to those plants and engineer a product that would do the specific job they wanted. Then they'd come back to the plant and it would be formulated so that the proper materials and the bonding would be put into it, and the proper heat applied, pressures applied, length of heat, and all these things. So the product really was quite a technical product before it went out the door. And it was could be a dangerous product because of the speeds that those wheels were run. So testing at the end of the process, every single wheel was tested.
Is it right?
Speed tested. Many of them were tested for hardness. And believe it or not, that was done by hand with a chisel and a man's hand feeling the hardness of that product.
Is that right?
And then, of course, the product was labeled and shipped.
Coming back to, just to interrupt you again, to this fellow who gave the talk over the Historical Society, they were talking about the balancing of wheels.
Balance.
And how a fellow could taste, using a taste test on the wheel to determine whether the grit was, I don't know exactly what he was describing, but taste had something to do with it. A fellow would take whatever the grit was and taste it to make sure it was.
Well, that may be a part of the hardness test that I don't recall taste itself.
I'm not doing justice to what he was saying. So.
But certainly the hardness, a person got so skilled that they could tell with a chisel the hardness of a product.
That's something.
And because there were two or three different major types of vitrified wheel, which is harder than a resinoid wheel, for example, in different colors and a different formulation. But these people were so skilled they could test those things. And when more modern equipment came, it was no more accurate than what those people were doing by hand.
Wow.
Sort of
And some of those wheels that didn't pass the test were used how?
Well, for years they were just thrown away. And then Bay State, along with Norton and I think the Bay State Abrasive Association, said, look, we've got to find a use for this material. Because there were rejects, a lot of rejects. Yeah. And so finally a way was developed so that they could re-burn those wheels and get the grain back. So right? Reclamation started, if you will, to reclaim the grains that were being thrown away for years. And so that became a very large part of the process, and Bay State built a separate building down in what we call the island. It was
way down the back. Yeah.
Way down in the back.
That's where the pallet company is.
That's where the pallet company now is, and beyond a little bit there.
Perhaps this picture will help.
And we actually even went back and dug up piles of those old broken wheels that had been buried, actually just over the years, and reclaimed them.
Yeah. Wow.
In fact.
Here's yet another picture. This is a much more modern one. And there, at the very end of that long driveway, you can see what they call the island warehouse.
Yeah.
No longer is there a playing field. Now it's parking lot. And there are more buildings in this picture than were in that original picture.
Right, yeah.
Although the picture is smaller, it's a lot newer.
That's great. Yeah.
Much larger operation. Now you don't see any more of those many kilns.
No, that's right.
Because the latest of the kilns became really a tunnel kiln. And the tunnel kiln allowed a product to start at one end of a building and slowly go through the firing process on wheels, through timing, etc., until it got to the other end, and then the wheels were removed. Whereas before, with the kilns, they built a kiln, they would put the wheels in on some sort of non-flammable pallets of sorts. And that's where they would, and then they had to take down or open up the kiln wall in order to remove the wheels. And then they'd build it up again. So the process went on, and it took a lot of time. And so this tunnel kiln was a great saver of time, and it was much more precise because it could be controlled by air, could be controlled by temperature, and the amount of time that the wheel was in it, et cetera, et cetera.
Wow.
You know, the tunnel kilns were 180 to 200 feet long, and they started at one end, being loaded onto a small rail car that would go through the tunnel. The temperature was brought up in degrees, very carefully monitored all the way through, and then as it got beyond the half mark, we'll call it, the temperature was lowered, lowered, lowered till it got back to room temperature, and the men could handle it, those wheels at the other end. Whereas before, with the beehive kilns, we had to wait a week before you could even open the thing, and people could get near it.
Yeah.
So the tunnel kilns were a real labor and cost saver once they were established, and by 1962 or 3, we had 3 of those kilns plus all of the others types that we gradually retired.
Great.
And we talked about a nice place to work before a little bit, and I am sort of proud of the fact that many families in Westborough would have 2 and some 3 generations working at Bay State at one time. And there are many families that had 4 and 5 members of a family working at the same time, which I think says a lot about Bay State and the people and happy workers. 1938 hurricane. Bay State men and women, I guess, to some extent, were sent out to help homeowners and businesses that got harmed during that time, clearing streets, putting houses back together, and all of that. Same thing happened in the tornado of 1953. Carpenters, plumbers, electricians were sent all over town, putting on roofs and whatnot, and Bay State maintained their salaries while they were doing that. We also had, when I was a young man in this town, had call firemen, many of whom worked at Bay State, and we had an alarm system. We'd get a call from the fire department, the alarm would go off inside the plant and office, and the place would
empty
with the firefighters.
Yeah.
And many of the call firemen actually had special places to park, so they were near a door. And over the years, we had 2 fire chiefs that worked at Bay State, and they too, of course, had honored places to park.
Well, you know, those fire boxes that were established on light poles all over town had a number. Each box had a number, and we as school kids were trained to know what was your box number, so that if ever you heard the alarm from the firehouse itself, you would know whether it was your house might be the one in danger. But we were also taught what the Bay State numbers were, and there was more than one, and so if we ever heard that number, we knew that there was trouble.
Yeah. You weren't the only ones who knew the number.
Right. A lot of people knew their
You
numbers.
zip open the door and say, what's
Yeah,
the
that's right. You
number?
you turn your ear in hopes that you get the whole thing.
Yeah.
Well, just before you get going again, Earl,
Yes.
You commented about the employees going out and helping. It seems to me that when I came into town, whenever there was a need in town, one of the first reactions people was, well, let's go see Bay State.
Right.
And you had a phenomenal reputation for just caring for the town in so many different ways, humanitarian-wise, but also fiscally in terms of building things for them. The field house at the high school was built by you folks. There's so many things that you could enumerate that Bay State did.
Well, yes.
It was a real good neighbor in town. It was
Yes.
for those of us who knew nothing about it other than
Well,
hear the hum and the plant going.
there are many stories that could be told. Many of them, of course, would be too private
Yeah, that's right.
to expose.
Sure,
But Bay
absolutely.
State was always there if there was a need in town, really.
You know, one of the reasons, Bob, I think, was that the founders came from very humble beginnings. My dad immigrated to this country from the Netherlands. His father was basically a farmer, and all of his siblings, not all, but of the 8, at least 6 went into farming. And they knew what it was to struggle. My mother certainly was from humble beginnings. And we were looking at the records, and Buck himself was a minister. So he was a PK. He was a minister's child. And that's not a lucrative field either. So I think they recognized the need that employees had, and they were very quick to respond, and it just spread over into the town too.
It certainly did. Certainly did.
Yeah. Well, the founders also encouraged employees to work in the town on town boards, and encouraged them to do that. And if they needed time, they took it. We had selectmen and finance committee members, planning board. In fact, Mr. Crowell himself served 10 years, I think it was, on the town finance committee and several years on the planning committee. And I'm told was one of the finest Sunday school teachers in the town, according to some of his...
Sunday school teacher.
He's a lay Sunday school teacher, right. And some of them still remind me of that when they remember Mr. Crowell. So it's, they contributed, to all of the founders did, in many ways, through the corporation and personally to the town.
Now, as we talk, you're making it sound in third person. You had something to do with it too, didn't you?
Well, yes, I was invited, but very little. I, of course, was not a founder, but I was invited into the family business and did work there for 10, 11 years, and had the pleasure of working with them, although Mr. Crowell said if I would come to Bay State, he would retire. And he did that. He was a man of his word. He did that immediately.
Did he really?
He did. And I still, you know, honor him for all he did,
Yeah.
as well as giving me his daughter. So that was a wonderful experience, and I was in a different business of my own, and I was about to buy another drugstore.
Yeah.
He came to me one day and said, "Earl, we better talk. I need to retire, and I want someone in the business to represent the family."
Great.
Because there were 3 families that basically owned the business.
Yeah.
So I did that, and I never regretted a day of it.
Yeah. Great.
Wonderful, wonderful place, wonderful people. And one of my joys was Friday afternoons I sort of set aside and would walk through the shop, talking with people.
Great.
Got to know many of them and their families. And 40 years later, some of them have still come to me and said, "Earl, you carried on what the founders did, and we appreciate that."
Great. Great.
Many of them.
Great.
And after the company was sold, we still got invited back to the celebrations. And one more thing that I'm very pleased to have had the opportunity to do is Mrs. Crowell was the last of the founding gentlemen's wives to live. And she was invited, of course, to that party. And when she was asked to speak, at first she said, "Well, I don't think so. Earl will do it for me." Well, Earl did his part, but then went back to the table and persuaded her
Great.
to go to the podium. And I think she, at that time, was 96, I believe, at that last party she attended. And without a note, without any preparation, because she was determined she wouldn't do it, she went to the podium, turned and looked at the people, and thanked them from the bottom of her heart
Yeah.
for what they had accomplished.
Yeah.
Not she or her husband, for what they had accomplished. And gently went back to her seat
Yeah. Great.
and stole the show for the night, of course.
Well, you know how fond I was of,
Yes.
of Polly.
Well, everyone was very fond of the wives of the founders, supported them, certainly, and
Yeah.
loved the company and the people.
Yeah. She was such a humble woman.
Right. Humble woman, yeah.
I had a Bible class with her over at the Willows, and she'd always
Yes.
say to me, "Well, I'm glad you're here because you know something about the Bible, and I don't know anything about it." And I kept on saying, "Polly, you'd have forgotten that I failed New Testament. I golfed most everything I had to do with the Scripture, so you're not looking at, oh no, you know a lot more about that. She just kept insisting that she...
Well,
But you know, you mentioned that you would go through the plant and talk with various folks. In my notes from Dad, it mentions that he and Buck would go through the plant. And in the early years, wanting to have harmony to as great extent as possible, that they sort of would go into the plant and they would listen to any complaints.
sure.
And if they could possibly do something about those complaints, they would act on that. Later, that was not happening. But in talking with me, he said, you know, Buck and I used to just walk through the plant, and we didn't know some of the younger persons there, but we knew the old timers, the ones who had worked with us, doing everything by hand, sweeping, hammering, building, whatever. We remembered them, and we could just have time to comrade with them for a little bit.
Great, great. I when it was being torn down, I'm sure that was a painful thing for you to know about, but I had a lot of idle time on my hand, having been retired myself, and I'd go down to watch the demolition. And as I did it day after day, I became aware of how many other cars that were also there, of employees who just were in mourning.
right.
That's the only way I could put it. They just were in mourning to see this old, beautiful thing going by the wayside. It's got to be really painful, really painful.
Well, it was so difficult for me that I, as you know, we've shared this before, I didn't want to go and see it being dismantled, and it was difficult to see.
Yeah.
But it had to be done. And as maybe some of you don't know, that it's the location where now Bay State Commons is built. And the Bay State came from the Bay State Abrasives. Right. Bay State Abrasives got named that name because Mr. Crowell in particular wanted something to establish it as a Massachusetts company. And Massachusetts was known as the Bay State because of the Cape Cod and the Bay. And so that the name originated that way. If you want a little more history,
Yeah, do, yeah.
quick,
Yeah,
I love numbers, as you know. That was my field. In the growth process, in 1938, Bay State purchased the Brantford Grinding Wheel Company in Brantford, Ontario. And that brought along with it about 120 employees. In 1940, Bay State purchased the Country Club
Yeah, good for you.
and the Keating block on East Main Street, so West Main and East Main. And they bought it particularly to have a place for the employees first, and then any townspeople to use those facilities. I've forgotten the exact year. I think it was 1960, 61, somewhere in there. Bay State, knowing that they would not be there forever, offered to sell the Bay State to the town of Westborough for $1. And the town decided at a town meeting that they thought that the town was not ready to own a golf course. So waited for some years later and purchased it
That's right.
at a different price.
Same story in Lake Johnson, on the beach.
That's all right. And from 1938 through 1963, I think literally there were new buildings being built or older ones being refurbished every few years. I don't think there was a period of time in there that more than a couple of years something more was being built,
Yeah.
if not there, in other locations. 1951, we mentioned before, they purchased the playground, and that was 1951. And in 1951 also, the government gave Bay State approval to put on a $1.2 million addition. And I don't really remember why we had to get approval, but apparently there was a governmental requirement at that time, because we had built buildings that were more than that before. But that popped up when I was looking for material. 1960, Bay State purchased the Felker Grinding Wheel Company in Torrance, California. And they, I mentioned before, were one of the innovators of the diamond wheels. And diamond wheels were actually made with diamonds, and you could see those diamonds in them. They were crushed diamonds from the filings and the break-offs of course, the diamonds you wear on your finger. But we stored that diamond dust in that old kiln that was first made from the chimney.
Yeah.
And we guarded those day and night.
So,
big inventory.
yeah.
Not many people knew about it at the time. So
Just as a human interest.
yes,
Just a human interest.
a human interest, all
At
right.
the time when Earl engaged and asked me to marry him,
She's going to
it
tell
was,
stories now at a time.
he wanted to buy an engagement ring. And he mentioned that to Dad, and he said, well, and don't just go into a store and buy a diamond. Let me take you to the diamond merchant. And so we had a family trip. Mother and Dad, Earl and I, went to New York City
Oh, wow.
to meet with the diamond merchant. And there we saw more gemstones than I ever believed could be had. And that's where we picked out one. But it was that relationship with the diamond merchant because of Bay State's need
wow,
for
yeah.
industrial diamonds.
Yeah.
Just a fun
Just a fun thing.
Yes, there it is.
There it is.
There it is.
Sparkling.
Now, you didn't tell them that Earl went with his pockets full of cash. So I had no idea. So that's a family Bay State story.
Looked like a cartoon character with
I was a
a
cartoon.
doll popping up here and a doll popping up there.
What did I know? Oh, my.
Didn't you also get a braces from England?
Oh, yes, yes, England
I
and,
thought I remember trains
all
coming
over the.
over.
Mr. Crowell, in his younger years, actually was sent by Norton Company to South America to discover bauxite.
What's that?
So
right?
he spent a year and a half in South America finding and mining bauxite, which
Wow.
is a basic material
Yeah.
to grinding wheels. And Mr. Buckner worked for several years in Japan for Norton Company, and I believe that's where his wife, who was English, but I think they met there. And another inside story is that Connie's mother, Polly Fairbanks, years ago, of course, was working in the sandwich shop where Mr. Krull, who was a bachelor, used to stop at noon or whenever to get his lunch. And he sort of noticed that she was not just a lovely young lady, but she was a hard worker. And so when she graduated from high school and took a special typing course, she walked herself down to Bay State that had just opened months earlier and suggested to Mr. Crowell that she might want a job there. And I guess it didn't take him long to hire her, because I believe she was the first office employee.
What's she doing?
And I think it was not too many years after that before she became Mrs. Crowell and the First Lady of Bay State.
Mm-hmm. Great.
And she lived to be
102.
102
Okay.
and the last First Lady of
That's right.
Bay State Abrasives.
That's right.
Mm.
Great lady.
Great lady. Just a couple more dates, and I won't bore you more. 1963, Bay State built a new plant in Luxembourg.
Hmm.
In Luxembourg. Now, we had looked through Italy, Germany, and other countries and turned down great offers from those countries to build, but we could see that their accounting systems wouldn't fit our moral standards.
Hmm.
So we found a place in Luxembourg and built a lovely plant there and had very good success.
Didn't Don Wilson from here?
Don Wilson, who some of you people may still remember, was sent over there to actually engineer and supervise the construction of that building, and stayed for a year with his wife running the plant. As he had done in the early years in Westborough. He actually was a plant engineer and ran the plant for several years. A gentleman that knew where every wire, pipe, turn-off was in that whole plant for many, many years. Just a mind that grasped those things.
Was he not the one who came up with the idea that a single chimney, if it were tall enough and big enough, could handle the needs of the Bay State plant? That is only needs that
Right,
demanded
exactly.
a
And
chimney
of course,
type
we
thing.
built a brand new power plant that you perhaps, Bob, were in. And Don was responsible for that. I think that was his last big project before he
When
had-
was that chimney built? When was that? That was.
That
should have stood forever. That was.
well, that's too bad it wasn't left, yes. I don't recall the exact year. I'd be guessing.
That was something.
It's a beautiful job, yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, in the
Well, why
last...
don't you just, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but
No.
you mentioned Don Wilson and you mentioned Leonard. How about, what was the other succession? What were some of the other
All right, the
leaders of
founding three were Mr. Krull, Mr. Buckner, and then Earl Hughes
Right.
that stayed. Now, there were two other men that stayed very briefly from the beginning. That was a Wallace, Mr. Bullard.
George Bullitt?
George Bullard.
He founded Bullard Abrasive?
He later
Yes, he
founded
later-
Bullard Abrasives up on Hopkinen Road,
Right.
and his sons ran that after he died. There was a Wallace Greenwood, and he came from Norton Company, stayed a few years and died very young. And Bay State established a scholarship for Wallace at Clark University, which still is in existence, and we still get reports on that, and giving scholarships to students there.
Great.
And the next round, if you will, or level of executive management was Arthur Gilman,
Okay, yeah.
who became president for 10 years. Eldon Ocker, who many may remember as being a professional baseball player, who I believe developed what is known as the underhand throw or something.
Sidearm.
He threw it from his knee, down in his knee, and he was known for that. And Eldon died just a few years ago.
Did he?
In Florida. And the third man in that level that were being brought up as the understudies was Harold
Clayton, wasn't it?
Clayton, Harold Clayton. And again, they were chosen because of their particular niche. Those of us old enough think of a company, any company, as needing three legs, like a milk stool. If you take any one of those legs out, the stool falls over. If you do the same with the company will fail gradually, perhaps. And so each of the founders chose the person and that they would recommend for the job to follow them. And that's how that happened. And then there was, for a short time, another ring, if you will, or level of management. That was made up of Nick Morpher, who became president after Arthur Gilman and
Clayton.
and then in that group,
It was a Charlie.
Charlie, who became treasurer. I should remember that name. And Nick, no, not Nick. Can't think of the gentleman's name, but the three of them likewise.
Right.
took those positions, and then my generation then came along.
Yeah. You have on your lap a booklet
Mm.
that you told me about.
Yes, again, thinking of the employees, Bay State, from the very early years in the 40s, started a monthly newsletter that was made, put together, edited, and everything by the employees. And usually each monthly edition was probably 6 to 8 pages. And then at the end of the year, the company would have those bound
Great.
and put into these lovely folders. And so I think I have,
Wow. That's
we
good.
have,
1950.
this, I just took one out of the boxes, just
Yeah.
grabbed one. This happens to be a 1954 issue, but I believe I have a full set
Wow.
of
Great.
these from day one. However, if there are any people out there that have these editions and no longer want them, I'd like to have them. We are putting together memorabilia and
Great.
papers about Bay State, and because the Bay State was built by the employees, and they're in these books. Pictures of them, a new birth, a wedding, a funeral, a birthday, anything you want to know about anyone that worked at Bay State, you probably can find in these
Great.
books. And it's a beautiful history. We'd like to preserve it. And I have one more thing I would like to show you,
Yes.
which
Yeah, I was wondering.
Yeah,
which
please.
I'm kind of protecting, if you will, because it, to me, one piece of paper says a lot, and it happens to be I have the original, and it was written by Connie's dad.
I think you could hold it up and she could get a picture of
And it was written in 1928
Great. Yeah.
while he was traveling.
it. Being the salesman that he was.
Being the salesman that he was, he traveled, he sold, and he delivered and Bob will like this, in a Model A. He had a Model A with 1930 Model A, I believe it
There you
was,
go.
with a jump seat or rumble seat, as we used to call it, and that would be full of abrasive wheels, honing sticks, anything he could get in there, and the passenger side of the car likewise. And he would start off, and he would sell, and he would deliver. Apparently, this particular night, he was in Indianapolis, June 26, 1928,
Wow.
and he thought, I forgot to tell Miss Farquhar when to give the pay increases. So he wrote this letter: Dear Miss Farquhar, this is your authority to increase office salaries as follows. On July 6th, you will pay Miss Lenane $23 per week. Miss Farquhar, the lady he addressed this to, $23 a week. Miss Lane, $18.50 a week. Now, I know that these ladies work more than 40 hours a week, but if you work out the numbers, if they worked only 40 hours, it would be 57 cents an hour for the 23 and 46 cents an hour for the 1850. I also have at home payroll records, all done, handwritten by Connie's mother. And the people in the factory were taking home, this is in 1928,
Yeah.
so in 22 and 3 they were taking home a lot less money, but still the best paid in the area. So if we want to make comparisons someday, think
fine.
about
Yeah.
the loyalty, the work, the esprit de corps, if you will, of people that
Right.
put together a company like this and brought it to a wonderful, wonderful place.
Yeah, that's That's great.
So,
One of the things Dad had said is that very often persons would come and try to encourage the employees to join the union or to start a union
Yeah.
at Bay State. And the employees would look at those representatives and they thought, you know, they don't look so hot. I think we've got it better here in Westborough than they have wherever they are. I don't know that we want what they're offering. But Dad said that they always paid a wage that was higher than the industry. And because they had that early on, they had that time of listening to complaints and acting on them when possible, that the workers had no need for anything that was being offered to them outside. And so all of the things that you've been saying reflect the fact that Bay State really cared for their employees, had a sort of a benevolent love for their employees and their families, and did that which they felt was right for them.
You think we'll ever get those days back? The loyalty to company and the loyalty of company to employee? And
Well, it starts with individuals, doesn't it?
It
starts
does.
with the individual,
Yeah.
the people,
And whatever's in their heart, that's what they'll do.
the recognition of people's needs and their likes and dislikes and working them out together.
yeah,
You know, so
yeah. It's a shame we lost that.
it's,
It's a shame we lost that.
the Westborough one I especially remember because I was involved in helping him write that, and then because it was a gift to the town that was unusual, it had to be brought to the town hall meeting.
Right.
And I had the pleasure and the nervous time of presenting that to the town, and of course they overwhelmingly accepted it. And there have just been hundreds, really, of school
Right.
Westborough graduates who've received scholarships since.
Tremendous.
And that continues on and will in perpetuity.
Yeah.
Well, we'd have to add Mother to that
She-
formula,
she
too.
should.
Yeah.
Mother always felt so inhibited in some ways because her formal education ended at high
Right.
school with that typing course that she took afterward. And she felt so strongly that education was desperately needed. She was so aware that her brother had to quit school at the age of 16 in order to be able to help in the household so that she could finish. And so by her desire to enable others to have more education than she herself had, she was an inspiration along with Dad to do those scholarships and keep them going.
And she added to that
Yeah.
scholarship fund
Yeah.
for Westborough.
Great family, yeah. Well, you provided for the town not only this conversation today, but also as a result of that, a record of a business, of an institution in this town that we're too easily forgetting. And I think it's terribly important that this be held and held on to for the historical record of what's going on. And I really appreciate your willingness to bare your souls a little bit and to talk a little bit about something that you had an awful lot to do with. And thank you for
very
doing it.
welcome.
You're welcome, and
It's kind of a joy to be able to talk about it.
Great, yeah.
you know, and,
And I don't mean to cut you off if there's
no,
anything else you
no,
wanted to say,
no,
but
I think
if we've just about drained you out, I think we'll.
but if I'd invite people, if they have questions later and see us on the street or call us, we'd be happy to chat with anyone.
Well, thanks again, Connie and Earl. It's a
You're very
pleasure,
welcome.
Thank
pleasure
you.
to meet with you.